used to listen to the Mormon organ on the radio, their programs, Sunday mornings. I just loved it. And actually, I was interested in the harp at the time, too. But the organ was so beautiful in so many ways. It had so many sounds and personalities, and it charmed me. So I decided on the organ.
And that, as they say, was that. With the certainty and determination that have been her professional hallmarks, Diane Bish chose a life and accepted a mission. And for 35 years, she's been the foremost ambassador for the pipe organ, her television programs, The Joy of Music, heard and seen by millions around the world. By a strange and happy coincidence, it seems both Diane and I started our broadcasts in the very same year, 1982. She commented over lunch a while ago that I have it so easy because on radio I don't have to look good. Well, there's no question that she does have the more difficult job, but has made a great success of it, which benefits us all. And today we celebrate the First Lady of the pipe organ, Diane Bish, who has lived her life for the joy of music. Do stay with me. I'm Michael Barone. This is Pipedreams from American Public Media. As we tip our hat in celebration of Diane Bish for the joy of music, picking up with reminiscences about her beginnings and the enthusiasm she developed for the pipe organ listening to the Mormon Tabernacle broadcasts on radio.
When I started listening to that and Biggs recordings, E-Pair Biggs, I was in junior high.
And with whom did you study first?
Well, I studied with Dorothy Addy in Wichita, Kansas. And she was wonderful because she knew that I liked challenges and I learned fast. So she would just dump repertoire on me, one piece after another. By the time I was out of high school, I had played so much of the organ repertoire because she just kept giving it to me. And she had a wonderful library of organ music. In my high school, we had a pipe organ, and it was a quite large pipe organ, and we had a wonderful orchestra there. And so I did one of the Handel organ concertos in high school and used to give organ recitals for the students, which is thousands of students. And I used the organ for assemblies and things like that. So that was really quite something to have that big organ where I could use it.
What did your classmates think of you? I mean, were you one of the rock stars of your high school class?
They always remember me as playing the organ. I mean, it was, such a big part of my life, a part of their lives, too. So they still remember all those days and what they heard from the organ.
Diane, you talked about your high school days. Then what?
Well, 2 years I went to Asbury College in Kentucky, but then I transferred to the University of Oklahoma. I got my bachelor's and master's degree there from Mildred Andrews. And she was such a fabulous teacher. Technically, you had to do everything perfectly. She was more into technique than she was in style. And her students, they were different, and she would know exactly what to do. Like in my case, she knew I loved challenges, so she'd give me a piece of music and say, now, this is very difficult, but I know you can do it. And then she'd give that same piece to another student, and she would say, now, this piece is not difficult. I don't think you'll have any problem with it. But she would get the same result, which was amazing.
The story is that the instruments at the University of Oklahoma in those days were not what you would call stellar, but nonetheless, she turned out an incredible crop of wonderful young performers.
Yes, because she used to say, they were terrible organs, and for practicing, we had reed organs, and half the notes wouldn't even play. They'd be sticking up, and it was just a terrible thing to have to practice on those. But she used to say, if you can sound good on these instruments, you can sound good on any organ. She was right. I mean, if you could play the music on those organs and the one in the auditorium, too, which was very a simple organ, you could play any organ, make it sound good.
How did you come to choose Gustav Leonhardt as someone with whom to study later?
Well, I applied for a grant to work with him because he played both the harpsichord and the organ, which I was interested in. He was so well known on his recordings, and I used to listen to his recordings a lot. I would say, musically speaking, I learned the art of music on the organs and the harpsichord. You didn't have expression pedals, you didn't have crescendo pedals, you didn't have a way to express except through articulation. That was his main thing, was articulation and spacing and how to play each note and how to play it in the phrase. And at lessons, he would say to you, would you give me a lecture, please, about this measure? And so you would have to talk about what to do with the rest, the phrase, the notes, the background, the style, the composer. I mean, it was really the knowledge of music and how to make music by articulation.
Were you receiving single one-on-one lessons, or were you part of a class?
No, I was one-on-one for a year. I studied with him at the Valsekerk, studied organ in Amsterdam. That was where he was organist, and I would go there every day. I had a little car. I'd just sort of race downtown in my little car and freeze to death in that church. It was, in the wintertime, it was so cold, but it was something I loved doing, and I loved that experience.
When you came back from your studies in Europe, where did you go? What was your destination? Did you have a destination? How did your future evolve?
Well, I stayed for a year at home in Kansas, Wichita, Kansas. And I taught at Friends University. I taught harpsichord and some organ. And then I applied for a Fondation des États-Unis grant in Paris with Marie-Claire Alain, which I received. And then I, after a year, went back to France, to Paris, to study with her.
And from that point, well, let's talk about it, because we think of Leonhardt and Marie-Claire Alain as being at the vanguard of the new awareness of old music. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I was amazed with studying with the two. In many cases, they would not necessarily agree on phrasing or articulation of the early music. And so I did study early music with her, but I also studied, Alain, and I studied Buxtehude and Bach, and a lot of the French music, which she was so fine at playing as well. So I studied all kinds of music with her.
And again, returning from Europe to the United States, what was the next step?
I accepted the job in Wichita Falls, Texas, where Nita Aiken had taught for years. And she had built up quite a large organ department there. So I taught there for, I think it was a year and a half. And then I decided that teaching was not for me. I was more into performance, and I also wanted to have a church job. All the church jobs were taken there in Wichita Falls by other people. So the pastor at the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale called me out of the blue. He had heard about me from some lady back east, and he invited me to come down there and be their organist. And I turned him down. And then I thought about it for a year, and lo and behold, he hadn't hired anybody. So I called him back and I said, I think I'd like to, if it's still open, I'd like to accept that job. And he said, great, come on down.
What point did the joy of music begin? Was this part of the ministry outreach of the church?
No, it was not. I went to Coral Ridge in 1971, and that's when we were in the old church. We moved to the new church in 1974. But I want to go back a little bit, because I had always listened in high school and even junior high to the recordings of Pipedreams on the European organs. And I'd always thought, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could see those organs rather than just hear them? And I always wanted to do television shows. So from 1971 to 1981, I wrote proposals to public television about just doing an hour special on the organ. or to do a series, but nobody was just interested. So in 1981, I met a man from Germany whose father loved the organ, and they loved the organ. And I told him I want to start a television program. He said, I will help you. I will give you $20,000 or whatever.
Which meant something back then, $20,000.
Yeah, that was a lot of money. And we'd got the new organ at Coral Ridge. We had the television cameras, so I made 2 pilot programs, and I sent them around to, again, public television. He knew a man in California who owned Trinity Broadcasting, which is a religious network. Paul Crouch is his name. He came down to Fort Lauderdale, and I played the organ for him. And he said, I will sponsor your program. And he said, after a year, then you can send it to other networks. Now, Trinity Broadcasting, if you watch Trinity, it's not a network that would have classical organ music. It would have mostly pop music and that kind of thing. But he gave me Friday night slot. And at that time, Trinity Broadcasting was all over the country, all over the world, and it still is. It's millions and millions and millions of people. And millions of people saw that show on Friday nights at 8:30. And, those early days when I was just on that network, it brought in so many viewers. And when I play concerts, I never play a concert, but what some young man mostly say, I watched you every week, all over the country. And that's why I play the organ today. And that's why I'm in music today.
You compose, too. I've heard a number of your arrangements, and I remember way back at the Houston AGO convention quite some years ago, a premiere of a new work that you had written for that. Is composing something that you've worked hard to do, or it just seemed like a natural outpouring of your music?
It's hard work for me because I write everything. I don't do it on the computer, but I write everything out by hand. But I love to compose, and my problem is time. But I don't have just reams of music. I have orchestrated a lot of works for choir and organ and narrator. I did write an organ piece for narrator on The Passion of Christ, which I've recorded.
When did you first start composing?
Back in high school, I won an award from Mu Phi Epsilon for a choral piece that I wrote, an Alleluia. And so I've been composing ever since when I have time. My problem is time, and it takes a long time to sit down and work things out so somebody else can read them.
You look back and remember little Diane Bish in Wichita, Kansas, and are amazed at where you've gone?
I do, but I had the dream way back then. I have to give E. Biggs a lot of credit for my influence because he brought to the audiences the great European organs. He really influenced me to go to Europe and put these organs on the screen and then to combine them with other artists and instruments. That was something I dreamed about years and years ago. I mean, when I was in high school or before.
So you've really lived your pipe dream.
I have lived it, and it's been an amazing experience because people are fascinated with the organ. If they can see it up close, the organ combines all the instruments and more. To see it, the beauty of the casework and the pipework and the churches that they're in, it's an amazing experience. I mean, it can be a life-changing experience.
So for someone who didn't really want to teach and wanted to perform, you ended up being the biggest and best teacher after all.
I think that is one way of looking at it because people do gain skills by watching someone do something or listening to them do it or listening to what they have to say about the music. When you study with a teacher, person to person, you listen to what they have to say. You watch and listen to how they play it. But television is a great teacher. It's a great learning experience for people if the shows are respectable and they can bring music to life like Leonard Bernstein used to do.
I'm also thinking that you reach out beyond just the organ students to the broader populace, and that your classroom is far larger than it ever could have been had you stayed teaching at some little college.
That's true. And I really think the Lord called me to do this program. In high school, this high school of 3,000, they named me the editor of the newspaper. I have never written anything in my life. So I learned how to write or how to put things into a simple way that people could understand it and get to the point. That was a part of my doing The Joy of Music. I write all the scripts. I research where I'm going. I research the organs. I research the music, whatever, like you do so well. But my experiences gave me the ability to do The Joy of Music and to reach out to people who know nothing about what they're seeing or hearing.
Diane has been host of the Joy of Music broadcasts on television for more than 35 years, just as I've been cranking out Pipedreams. That's a remarkable milestone and an enviable accomplishment, Diane.
I'm having so much fun, but it gets harder every year because it's a lot of stress. It's one thing to go into these churches and see the organs and maybe play them. But to get into them to do television shows is quite difficult because a lot of these great churches and organs have had bad experiences with television crews who don't care, who don't have a respect for the church. And they come in and smoke in the church, or they throw things around, or they harm things. So I think it's getting harder to get into the churches.
Realizing that for each of us, there will inevitably be a final program. Have you thought where you want your grand farewell to take place?
No, I really haven't, because, there are so many, especially in Europe, but all over the world, so many remarkable instruments. I think the instrument that I love the most is St. Bavo in Haarlem. That was one of my first of all, I did 2 recordings on the instrument way back in the 70s, I guess it was. Then I went back and did 2 or 3 television shows. And to me, this is one of the great instruments of the world. So if I were to think of an instrument where I would end the Joy of Music, I wouldn't know where to go, because different instruments offer different things. I love the organ of the Ulm Cathedral. I love the organ of the Meersburg Cathedral. Like we just taped in Sancta Urban, which is an unbelievable instrument, in the surroundings and the beauty of the instrument. So I think I'm just going to have to keep going and see where I end up when I can't do it anymore.
Diane, 35 years with the Joy of Music, and years before that as you prepared for your life's work. You've been rather blessed, have you not?
Yes, I have. I really give thanks to God for his gifts to me and his opening of doors, and I give him the glory for it all. The thing about the Coral Ridge experience is that there was a beauty in the appearance of the organ. There was a beauty in the sound, and we had television cameras. What I haven't said is I love to work with other artists. And I'm talking about violinists and great choirs and brass ensembles. And we had a huge concert series at Coral Ridge Presbyterian. And that concert series would bring in great artists. And I would get those artists to come and do a program with me when they were there. And I would accompany them on the organ. So I had violinists and trumpeters and the Canadian brass, all kinds of brass ensembles, the Dallas Brass, the boys' choirs from all over the world, Vienna Boys Choir, which I've had on the show, the American Boy Choirs. So one thing I love about the organ is that you can combine it. It's such an orchestral instrument, and I have just loved doing shows with all these instrumentalists and singers.
at Marble Collegiate Church in New York City, an Easter hymn featuring brass and percussion ensemble, the Marble Choir, and the Festival of Voices, all led by Kenneth Dake, from the inaugural concerts on the 101-rank Sebastian Gluck pipe organ with Diane Bish at the controls. Diane, it's pretty remarkable that we've both been doing our programs for 35 years now, since 1982, me with Pipedreams and you with The Joy of Music. So much music, so many listeners, too. It really amazes me, as I expect it does you as well.
It does. It's amazing because, it makes me feel old. So I started the Joy of Music in 1982. And then in 1984, I started going to Europe, which is what I always wanted to do. And in those shows, I wanted to not only bring the organ, but the art, the cathedrals, the architecture, the scenic beauty, but also people who had no knowledge of the organ or of the great cathedrals or of where the music came from or of the composers. So that's what I wanted to do, is reach out to everybody.
And surely you have, through the Joy of Music telecasts. Saluting Diane Bish, 35 years.